When processing online forms, it's important to validate user input to make sure you're getting the information you want. JavaScript validation on its own isn't enough, because JavaScript can be turned off, leaving you exposed to malicious attacks. Validation also needs to be done on the server with PHP. In this lesson, I'll show you how to make sure required fields are filled in. The missing array will be used to store the names of form fields that are required but that have been left blank. The processing script needs to run only after the form has been submitted, so I'll create a conditional statement here using the isSet function, which checks for the existence of a variable. The variable I'm looking for is post_send, send being the name of the submit button. So any code that comes between these curly braces will be executed only after the form has been submitted. If you can't switch off magic quotes on your server, this is where you would include the script that removes unwanted backslashes. But I'm going to continue on the basis that magic quotes have been turned off on the server. The ultimate aim is to send the content of the form via email, so let's begin by creating a variable for the recipient of the email. And another one for the subject of the email. Next, I'm going to create two arrays, one to list the name attribute of each field in the form, and the other one to list all the required fields. So all the form fields will be in the expected array. This form contains three fields: name, email, and comments. And to demonstrate how this works, I'll just put two fields in the required array. Processing the contents of a form and sending it by email is something that you're likely to do quite often, so it makes sense to put the generic parts of the script in an external file that can be included in any other form. So I've created a PHP file here called mailProcess.php, and it has a for each loop in it, which is going to go through the post array and get the key and value of each array element. Before adding the code, I want to explain what it is that I want to do, because just looking at the code itself might be difficult to understand. What I want to do is to convert the post variables and store their values in simpler variables like this. The way I'm going to do it is by using a PHP construction known as variable variables. Let's say I've got a variable called key and its value is name. To create a variable, I precede the original variable with another $sign and then assign it a value, and the result is this. It creates a new variable using the original name. So if key is email, it'll create a new variable called email, and if key is comments, it'll also create a new variable called comments. I want to trim leading and trailing white space off each value, so I'm going to assign the value to a temporary variable called temp and use the trim function with the value, and that will take off any white space at the front or end of the value which has been submitted. But the problem is, although trim will work with text and text area values, it won't work with arrays, and some form fields do submit their values as arrays. So what I'm going to do is to use the ternary operator and set as its condition is array value. So if the value is an array, I will just reassign the array back to temp. But if it's not an array, in other words it's text, then it'll be passed to trim, taking off all that leading and trailing white space. So I can now check whether a value is empty, in other words been left blank, and if it's in the required array. So we look for the key and see if that key value is in the required array. So if a required field has been left blank, I want to add the name of the key to the missing array. And I need to create a variable so that we have a new variable based on the name of the key and set it to an empty string. But if the field's not blank, or if it's blank but not in the required array, I need to create a new variable based on the key name and assign the trimmed value of the current post array element to it. It's also important to check that it's in the expected array to prevent an attacker from injecting other variables through the post array. So let's just add an else if clause. Need to check that the key is in the expected array. Then use a variable and assign it the value of temp. So in both cases, a variable using the same name as the key is created, but if a required field is blank, the value of the new variable is set to an empty string, and its key is added to the missing array. The beauty of this script is that it can be used with any form and any number of form fields as long as you create the required and expected arrays. So let's save that page and then return to the form and include that script. I'll use the require command, and it's in a subfolder called includes. So let's save that and test it in a browser. When the form first loads, the error messages are hidden, but if I submit the form without filling in any of the fields, the error messages are displayed. There's no error message for email because that wasn't included in the required array. Let's just add some values into the fields. And submit the form again. This time the error messages have disappeared. There's a lot more to do to this script, but by looping through the post array and checking whether required fields have been filled in, you can display error messages.